Good morning, noon, and night, wherever you are, whenever you are. You're listening to The Shift. I'm your host, Doug McKenty. This is being recorded on March 8th, 2018. If you like what you're hearing, think about becoming a patron. That's patreon.com/The Shift. If you want to find more information about my perspective and get my news feed on Facebook, that's The Shift with Doug McKenty. Join the conversation on Twitter at @DMcKenty and find my archives and get more information about the show at www.theshiftnow.com. My guest on the program today is Chris Emery, executive producer at Free Mind Films. Established in 2011, Free Mind hit the documentary scene with the release of A Noble Lie, Oklahoma City, 1995, which quickly rose to prominence as the definitive film questioning the official government narrative about the bombing of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City on April 19, 1995. The film outlines multiple inconsistencies within the mainstream version of events, which claims that Timothy McVeigh, a disgruntled militia member and white nationalist, acted alone to build and explode a massive fertilizer bomb that destroyed the federal building and caused hundreds of casualties. Following the evidence, A Noble Lie raises the distinct possibility of at least one other accomplice, as well as presenting expert testimony stating that a fertilizer bomb could never have caused the massive damage witnessed on that fateful day. Free Mind Films has gone on to produce multiple other documentary films exploring the hidden powers behind the mainstream media and academic sources that may be consciously constructing a reality that intentionally obfuscates the true nature of those who act to shape current events. The film State of Mind, The Psychology of Control, describes how the mainstream has been co-opted and used as a medium for social engineering, while most recently the documentary Shadow Ring describes the organizations and the men behind them who are responsible for creating this matrix of control. Thank you, Chris Emery, for agreeing to be on the program, and thanks for helping to make the shift. How are you doing today?
Not too bad. Thank you, Doug. I appreciate the invite. I just want you to know we've been doing these interviews probably for about 2 years leading up to the release of our first film about Oklahoma City and right through today, and we never, ever take them for granted, so we certainly appreciate the opportunity to share the information, and we always learn from the hosts and from the callers, so let's have at it.
Great. Yeah, I've been really looking forward to interviewing you guys actually for a long time, and I finally got a chance to actually watch these documentaries, especially A Noble Lie. I heard about it for years, and I've wanted to be able to get more information about what happened on Oklahoma City during the bombing that day, and it was really informative for me. Even though I do a lot of research on a lot of these topics, you know, it's always good to find out more, and there's always more going on behind the scenes, and just watching the documentary, it was like, man, I can't believe they pulled it off again. You know, like here's just another example. As soon as you actually look at the evidence and you get away from the mainstream narrative, then it's difficult not to be frustrated because it seems like they're getting away with it more and more. So thanks a lot for the work that you're doing to try to expose what's really going on.
I appreciate it. I do want to, if I can, qualify that acknowledgement. When I moved to Oklahoma City in January of 2003, and it took us 8.5 years to get the film out, but there was personally, in fact, I remember looking at my archives, the legal pad that I had with all the names and phone numbers and addresses who we interviewed. The last number we had, and I'm not quite sure why, I guess we pretty much hit the limit as far as who we wanted to interview, 326 victims, family members, survivors, law enforcement, search and rescue, retired and active military, law enforcement from local, county, state, federal, both on the civilian and the professional side, retired members of the State House, U.S. Senate, U.S. House, as well as private investigators. So there was quite a cross-section of not only humanity but professions and people that were affected directly or indirectly. And then there was a core group of about 75 people that helped us, researchers, some that had passed on before and after the film had released, and then 15 of us on the crew. So it was not my doing only, and I'll be the first to acknowledge that. So it was just an absolutely life-changing experience. It continues to be, and I'll share a few things that even happened today that are related to the case. So anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it was amazing just to even watching the film, how many of the first responders you interviewed and how many of the victims. It was really reminiscent of 9/11, which I'm more familiar with the case of 9/11, but you just, interview after interview after interview of eyewitnesses and expert testimony saying, hey, what they're saying on TV is not what happened to me. and that you were actually, willing to go into it and hear their stories and then present it in such a succinct way in the documentary so that you can spread the word. It's just something that needs to be done so people can kind of wake up to just how manipulated the mainstream media really is. So will you get into a little bit about your history then and how you got into it? I read on your bio that you have been interested in government cover-ups, really in the 80s and the 90s as well. So when Oklahoma City happened, did you smell a cover-up right away?
No, sir. In fact, that was in 95. I was living in Austin, Texas at the time, and just like everybody else, it's the day you don't forget, like the JFK assassination or when MLK was assassinated or Bobby Kennedy. For those of us old enough to live through that, even as youngsters. But, I was working in Austin, Texas, and I remember that morning working at the office. Some of the secretaries were crying, and I walked in the break room at the office I was at and looked down at the small black and white TV, and I thought, holy cow, what happened here? I thought it was a massive gas explosion. Long story short, it wasn't until about 4.5 years later, I was in a discount bookstore, just going through the political section, and I picked up a book. And this is the one that really kind of piqued my interest in the case. It was about the political life of Hillary and Bill Clinton, and there were 4 chapters in there that were dedicated to the Oklahoma City bombing, and they're rather, it wasn't definite, but kind of a nebulous relationship to the case, and come to find out later that they did have a direct and indirect connection to the explosion, both on the commission as well as the cover-up. But it wasn't until I'd say probably early 2000 that I was approached by some media colleagues on the internet, and they said, "Hey, why don't you look into this case?" But that wasn't until after I was sunk my teeth into the U.S. Navy's accidental shoot down of TWA Flight 800. That's for another discussion, another interview, another time.
Right.
And I was asked to step away from that case because a family member had their job threatened.
Wow.
Working for the TWA. Again, another discussion, another time. And I was really bummed out. It took me about 2 months to get over that. And then that's when a couple of my buddies in Fort Worth, Texas, approached me. They just so happened to have the Betamasters. Now, this is back in the day before the digital really hit the television production in the studios. The 3/4-inch Betamasters, which was the high-quality VHS masters that TV stations would use to record live feed from their news trucks or download satellite trucks. And I looked at over 2.5 hours of raw footage that was never vetted. But it was going live on the uplinks to all of the major flagship stations, CBS, NBC, CNN, ABC, and local cable and PBS affiliates that day, that morning. And a lot of people don't realize that morning there was a big prayer breakfast, all of the interfaith groups at a convention center about 6.5, 7 blocks south of the bombing site. So all of the TV crews were down there, filming that. The governor was there with all the dignitaries, and all of a sudden all hell broke loose, and everybody raced up to the crime scene, and there was no way that they could vet this stuff. I mean, the walking wounded, the search and rescue, it was just an absolute mix of chaos, and the medical crews, and much to their credit, search and rescue, over 23 different search and rescue crews, fire and police, and trauma units trying to set up triage. And much to their credit, it was done very well. So anyway, that footage was of that happening live. And I was just in awe. I says, wow, why didn't we never hear about this? And so after walking out of my buddy's house after watching that, I says, there's something horribly wrong here. Not only were we lied to, but, these people were literally walking out of the building with their limbs missing, in shock, trying to help their friends out. I'm not going to get graphic here. And we were very careful not to include that in the film. But that's what really, set the direction. And I thought, okay, there's got to be something done here. And then, of course, at the benevolence of all of the, like I said, search and rescue law enforcement, one by one, they found out that our crew in Oklahoma City was trying to do a good job. And they came out of the woodwork and helped us in just absolute incredible ways.
Well, I mean, that really showed through in the film, that the community there, that the first responders, the people that you were talking to, it seemed like they were just so happy to talk to somebody that was willing to listen to what their stories were really about. And then the frustration that they felt dealing with the people that were pushing the official government narrative? I mean, trying to deal with the mainstream and with the FBI and the mainstream press that really weren't getting the story across. Can you talk to that? Like how did the official narrative kind of start to get out? How was it contradicting the people on the ground? And then, what were they doing as they got more and more frustrated?
Well, in fact, early on, let me share something with you. There was a PM anchor for a local TV station that we had dinner back in 2007. So we're talking, 12 years after the fact. Mm-hmm. I finally met up with him in Detroit, and he told me, I'm going to share this with you. Not a lot of people know this, but he said that morning, of course, he's the PM anchor, so he typically goes home at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. And he was sound asleep at 9 o'clock when he heard multiple explosions, felt it shake his bed in his house about 2 miles from the crime scene, races into the studio. And if you can picture this, and I remember I was at the History Center about 6 months after I moved here, and I was looking through the archive footage of what happened that morning. They had it on VHS Masters. Maury Povich, the show, and I'm going to make this real quick here. The Maury Povich show was on at top of the hour break. And it was some crazy guests. They're throwing stuff around on stage, getting stupid, mm-hmm. Just a cut above Jerry Springer back then.
Right.
And it was just out of control. And all of a sudden, if you can imagine this, the weatherman who does the top of the hour weather breaks, and the B team, basically one of the female reporters giving top of the hour updates on the news, they're breaking the story. The A team was already done in the morning, with their 6, 7, 8 o'clock broadcasts. They're writing up their news wrap-ups, getting ready to go home, because they show up at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. And these guys are breaking the story, and all of a sudden you see this crescendo, this tempo just raised, and there's the A team getting on the air. Mm-hmm. For the AM anchors, the PM crew comes in. They join the AM crew. That never happens. Mm-hmm. And it was just crazy to see this whole thing come together. Anyway, getting back to the official narratives, that the PM anchor told me they knew what was going on. The Highway Patrol, the Oklahoma County Sheriffs, and the Oklahoma Police Department, City Police Department, as well as the fire crews, they were sending updates to the newsrooms, finding out, telling them, look, this is search and rescue. This is where we're going to set up triage if you need to send supplies. Great line of communication. Bam, within 4 hours, guess who shows up? The big shoulders from Washington. And we knew what jets they flew in on. We had sources at the air base. Tinker Air Force Base, 11 miles southeast of downtown Oklahoma City. It's the largest material repair base for all of the armed forces. Navy, Marines, Army, Air Force aircraft are repaired at that base. So anyway, these jets are coming in with all of the big shoulders from Washington. Within 4 hours, we're talking at between 1 and 1:30, the whole news story changes. And this PM anchor said not only were they upset, but they knew darn well that somebody was slipping the pickle on them, so to speak, because they knew the story was completely distorted. You don't get real-time information from boots on the ground within 10 or 15 minutes after the story, and then all of a sudden 4 hours later, stuff that makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. But it was their boss that said, look, we have no choice. This is the storyline. This is the script we're going to follow. So he knew the gig was up from there.
Wow.
And it had a whole other layer to this thing. And it took me about 3 months to realize after I got here. It finally sunk in. Not only are we dealing with the victims' family members and survivors, but you're dealing with the friends and the law enforcement, people that worked in the FBI field office, as well as all of those law enforcement agencies and departments. All of their friends, a good number of their friends, and some of their family members and loved ones were killed in the bombing. How dare does the national authorities come in and tell these people how to do their job and change the script on the death of people that they love? So that was a complete undertow that to this day, that rift is still there. Not so bad as in the beginning, but it is still there. And I guess that's why our movie was as well received as it was. We didn't expect it. We just wanted to break even on the cost and do a good job. Mm-hmm. But that's what really hit the nerve of a lot of the people that were affected. And they said, thank you for doing this. We were very humbled. We're like deer in headlights. Like, what are you talking about? We finally realized where they were coming from. So,
yeah, that really Well, it does come across in the film. It just does that the people were so happy to be talking to somebody, that were actually cared and were
Oh
listening to the
God,
real
yeah.
story. I mean, and you could see the frustration. You could hear the frustration in their voices when they were trying to be like, I went to my congressman, I talked to my senator on the federal level, and I was getting nowhere.
Hmm.
And then, to even watch as you follow the citizens organization and the local. Why don't you describe for my audience the local representative, the Oklahoma State representative that ended up kind of leading the charge because he was so upset at
It
how
just so happens I was at his house this afternoon. We had a great
nice.
catch up chat, and yeah, Charles Key's
Hmm.
he's like a big brother to me. He's just an absolutely amazing guy. What happened? And there's another personal contact. If again you understand the context of what happened here, you have a heinous crime, 168 people killed, including 3 unborn children, and then the U.S. Justice Department. And I'm not talking about everybody. I'm not painting a broad brush here, but their top decision makers and the big shoulders there have the temerity and the gall to try to cover this case up, and they think they're going to get away with it.
Hmm.
No, it's not. It like I said, that whole gig was up within 4 hours after the bombing. A lot of people knew this thing was stinking high heaven. Anyway, Charles's secretary, Sandra Day, worked at the state capitol for him for a couple of years. She resigned and took a better paying job at the federal building, the Murrah building. She was there for about a year. And so he had a personal connection.
Yeah.
It was his secretary, and he went to church with her dad, her brothers, and her parents for years. And they were asking him, and this is really peculiar, but it was true. About 2 weeks after the bombing, they approached him after church, and they said, Charles, look, we're getting one story from Oklahoma City Police, another from the county sheriffs, something completely different from the Highway Patrol, and we honestly, we don't know what to believe, what the hell the FBI is saying anymore. And again, it's from the national office. There's a lot of good people in the Oklahoma City field office who wanted the truth to come out. They were told to shut up, threatened with their jobs, their pensions, you name it. They were just given the riot act. So that's why they pretty much walked away with their tail between their legs and said, we can't do anything, but you guys can help us. Anyway, so it was that personal connection and the fact that he represented District 90 on the western side of Oklahoma City. And a lot of people, of course, were affected there. They're writing him and saying, what in the flip is going on here? We're not getting a straight story. Just please tell us the truth. And again, so that's what he started his charge. And he said he remembers it was a Sunday afternoon, and I saw Janice this afternoon, and he sat down with his wife at about 2 weeks after the bombing and said, look, this is a rising star. He was the golden child, both on the House, on the Democratic and Republican side of the House. Everybody respected him because he didn't BS around, but he was very a straight shooter, and he was good. He was genuine and honest, and he treated everybody fairly. The governor had lunch with him on several times. All of a sudden, bam, he's ostracized. And he knew darn well, if he chose to drop the gauntlet on this case and really move forward on it, his political career would go down the toilet. And that's exactly what happened.
Wow.
Yeah, but he said, no, this is we're looking at the bigger picture. These people need to know what is going on. And he had a few of his colleagues from the House and one from the Senate step forward. Everybody else just walked away and says, no, we're not touching this thing with a 10-foot pole. To expand on that, both the House, the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate representatives and the senators from Oklahoma, all of them were told to shut up. We found this through back channels. All of them were told to shut up and walk away from this thing within about a half a day after the bombing. They were given this. They told, no, don't go near this thing. And I mean, this is going all the way up the flagpole to the White House. There was only one that came forward, and this is a few months after the bombing. And he asked me to keep his name under wraps, but he's the one that told Charles, I want to help you out, but I've been told to shut up. And then, of course, they've got other political capital that was at risk, and they couldn't touch this thing. So the Oklahoma delegation was threatened just flat out. This isn't covert. This is direct, straight in your face. They were told to shut up and not touch this thing or else. And the ultimatums weren't good. The choices were not good. So that's where we're coming in on the threatening and everything else and the harassment. So, and that's why we had the interest in the people wanting to come out and talk in the film. I've got one other thing with the DEA agent, but I can share that later. And this is really telling. But we can go on to that a little later if you want.
Yeah, I mean the whole story is just crazy. You were talking about then this representative Charles Keyes starts
Hmm.
a citizens organization, and as they just start looking into it themselves to try to find out the truth, they discover that all of their phone lines are getting tapped at some point.
Yes,
I mean,
yes, and yeah, VZ Lawton. We interviewed him in the film. Bless his heart. He passed away in 2012, I believe. The summer after our film had released. Just an amazing guy, and he told me this is like talking to your grandmother and grandfather. In fact, they were my adopted grandparents in Oklahoma City. They always invited me over for dinner, and he
wow.
said, "Yeah, we finally figured our phones were tapped." I mean, who taps the phone of 75-year-old couple, for Pete's sake?
Well, I mean
So
that's what's so amazing about this story is that I mean what's so wrong with just looking into this stuff? I mean, like you're talking about
right,
this if this happened in your neighborhood, wouldn't you be curious? And then you start to see that the authorities that are supposed to be on your side helping you out are actually actively kind of covering this stuff up. And then when you look into it yourself, you're getting all this backlash from those very authority figures that are supposed to help you out. So you know what was really going on. It's the things that kind of come to my mind. There are two things maybe we could just touch on. Is people need to watch the film really if they want to get the whole story. But
sure.
the one that really I think caught your attention, you spent some time in the film talking about this second accomplice that was there that came out right away. There were two guys by the truck bomb. And then everybody suddenly focuses on Timothy McVeigh, and it was kind of the lone gunman story all over again. But there was this second accomplice. And then the second issue that really I think was the nail in the coffin for me was when you talked to the military explosives expert who said
Oh,
that
General Barton. Yes,
yeah, the truck bomb
yes.
could never have done that damage, and that the columns must have been severed by explosives that were placed right on the columns. That just blew the official narrative right out of the water.
Well, that was his job for 18 years at the Pentagon Armament Lab. I mean, he was in charge of a crew. I believe he said 28 or 29 people. I flew out to General Barton's home in Alexandria, Virginia. It was in late October 2013. Spent the night there. And we sat at his dining room table for the better part of 7 hours. And I tell you, I don't know how else to describe this. It's like sitting across the table from Einstein.
Mm-hmm.
He was very easy to talk to, but this guy was absolutely brilliant. He was the expert's expert. Now, when you're in charge of billions of dollars of expenditures and budget to design armament for both the U.S. Air Force and the U.S. Navy, and he looked at me straight and he says, different paint job, same ordnance. And that was the way of cutting costs. I mean, he just crossed over a lot of these ordnances at different military, branches.
Mm-hmm.
But he would go out in the White Sands Missile Range in southern New Mexico and blow up small cities. Then he would have to do what they call after-action reports and white papers, literally run it up the flagpole to the White House and say, hey, look, this is the most efficient way. His bosses, the top brass, would present it to the president and, of course, try to get approval for funding from Congress. That's what he did for 18 years. So if he doesn't know what took the Murrah building down, nobody would. So I'm sitting across the dining room table from him. He's got the legal pad out, and he's just scribbling notes and formulas. And I had gone to engineering school, so I had a basic understanding, in advanced physics and chemistry. This guy, he just took it to a completely different level.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking, wow. So I kept those notes. I went through them, studied the formulas, and I understood what he was talking about. It took me about 2 days to decipher it all. But he was spot on. And what he told me, he says that if, in fact, the official narrative was true, and we touched upon this very briefly in the film because we had 6.5 hours of footage. We had to edit that down to a 2-hour film. Nobody
Right.
knew who we were. Anyway, this is more the technical side.
Sure.
But long story short, he said that what came out of that truck bomb, if you were to believe the official narrative, within 10 feet, the air pressure coming out of there would have been no more than what's in your bicycle tire.
Huh.
There's no way. It wouldn't have taken the plants out of the planters in front of the building, let alone shattering the windows.
Wow.
But what we studied, and yeah, I mean there were 3 columns in the building, just in a nutshell. And he literally showed me how that building fell apart into the parking lot across the street. And you know what really threw it off? He's looking at a Newsweek magazine cover photo of the building. And he saw the debris field in the parking lot across the street from the Murrah building. And that's when he let the words fly. And he took that magazine, slammed it down on the table, and he says, I'll be damned if these people are going to be lied to. And that's when he got on the phone with Charles Keyes. He says, what can I do to help you out?
Huh. Wow.
Unbelievable. Yeah. And he walked me through. And anyway, he said that the pressure, the ordnance from the inside the building just by the way the debris was flying a block and a half away into a 42-mile-an-hour headwind. We got a hold of National Weather Service reports that morning. We were very thorough. We had to make sure what the weather was like, with the wind direction, everything, temperature, humidity. That's when we started tearing this thing apart. And the official narrative not only didn't hold up, it was completely ludicrous, and it was just very. It was insidious what they tried to pan off on us, and it just simply didn't make any sense on almost any angle you look at it.
Yeah, I mean, you see it time and time again, actually, where it's all smoke and mirrors, these false flags and then these cover-ups. If you look into them, I mean, like, why didn't the FBI talk to this guy? Where are their experts that are telling them what's really going on? And as an independent investigative journalist, you look into it and you can find it out. You find out the truth. I mean, what happened that day? Like, they exploded a big bomb and everybody looked at that, and then nobody looked at what was really going on in terms of the science and the explosions. And I mean, you talk about there were probably multiple explosions, and in fact,
sure.
the first responders had to stop their work for a time because they thought that they had found a second bomb.
Well, there's three touchstones there. I'm going to real quick. First one, the FBI, the lead scientist for the crime lab, Dr. Frederick Whitehurst, was asked not. Get this. He was asked not to show up, not to travel to Oklahoma City. That would be your point, man. That would be the first guy I'd select. And then he selects his team to bring.
Right.
They knew he wasn't going to lie about the case. He came around and helped us out. And that's what we interviewed him we took the news clips on the film. We weren't able to actually do a sit-down interview with him, but it was a very telling revelation we got from ABC under fair use. We used their clip. He petitioned the Office of the Inspector General that issued a 33-page report. It was a scathing report, basically saying the FBI not only fabricated the story, but the evidence that they used to put the story together was completely manufactured from day one. They basically incriminated the defendants with the evidence versus using the evidence to put the story together. It was completely in the face of any integrity or whatever the case may be. And Fred Whitehurst knew darn well. He sued the Justice Department and was able to get that report. And the summary page is just, that's it. That lays it all out right there. It's one big whopping lie after the next. The second thing was, of course, the damage pattern where General Parton came forward. And it was search and rescue that told us, and the demolition crew that cleaned up the demolition after. This is when all of the bodies were recovered, and they were just hauling the debris away. That was a telltale time, because when they were taking the debris from the pile, they found out that not only were the planters right in front, were next to the alleged truck bomb, they were in pristine condition. That doesn't happen when you have ordnance coming out of the truck. There was no dirt missing. The plants were in pristine condition. Even the news box with the Wall Street Journal and the USA Today, the glass wasn't even broke on those boxes, and they were less than 8 feet away from the truck bomb. But clearly shows that there was unexploded ordnance in the building. Oklahoma County Bomb Squad, 2 agents came forward. One was a medic and another served on there as a reserve. They told us what they found when they went in the building within 30 minutes. There were 23 devices in the building. 3 of them went off.
Wow.
20 of them were unexploded.
Wow. That's crazy.
I know. So you want to believe the official narrative? Okay. And I'm not being trite or disrespectful here, but that's on the level of Dr. Seuss and Mother Goose. That is how ridiculous and how ludicrous it is.
Right.
So we just have to steer clear of that and go where the facts are.
Listening to you talk right now, I did an interview with Christopher Bolin, who was a 9/11 investigative journalist, and he told me exactly the same thing about the 9/11 Commission, that the guys from the White House showed up with the story, the narrative they wanted to tell, and then they fit the evidence to create the narrative. And you're telling me the same. I mean, you're seeing the same patterns over and over again, which is why
they pull out the same bag of dirty tricks. If it worked so well before, hey, let's run this through the mill again and see if the public's going to believe it. So.
Well, what do you see then as the motive for all of this? I mean, why is the federal government pulling this kind of crap?
Well, unfortunately, what we found out is that it wasn't supposed to go live. And a lot of people don't realize that we had full and unfettered access to the defense counsel documents. Stephen Jones was McVeigh's lead. He was the senior legal counsel, the chief counsel. He had a team of if I recall, he had 52 to 58 people working on his team. They billed the government for over $28 million for their time. And this is over the course of, I believe, just over 2 years. Stephen Jones became McVeigh's legal counsel, I believe, within 2 weeks after the bombing. And he had two local attorneys. And when they found out what was going on, they said no. They recused themselves.
Wow.
We're stepping away from this. You know, we want a career. We want to go home and look at our family straight in the face and say, hey, we did a good job on that. And they knew darn well that they couldn't do that. And I'm not taking anything away from Stephen Jones. I had a really good conversation with him in his office for almost 3 hours. And he told me what pressure he was under, and his life was threatened. But that's another conversation for another time. He did the best he could with what he had. So much so that when he found out about us working on this film, I remember that evening I left. It was a Wednesday night. In fact, it was the week before I went and flew out to visit General Parton. He gave me the card to the curator of a museum, a law museum, library in Austin, Texas, because that's where he went to law school. Mm-hmm. And he said, look, you guys, we know you're going to do a good job on this. I want you to have access to all of 141 boxes of legal documents. Can you imagine? I mean, that's like looking at a cave full of gold, and it's like, wow, where do we start?
Right.
So we had some great people, archivists, producers that were just absolutely amazing on how they documented and put this stuff in an order that would make sense. We saw McVeigh's, who he worked for. He was working for the CIA. There's absolutely no doubt about it. In fact, again, a couple of other tidbits here. McVeigh was on, get this, during the first Persian Gulf War in 1992 or 1990, he was on General Schwarzkopf's security detail. He was a gunner, a 52 cal a gunner on a tank. He could take a target out at 800 yards downrange.
Wow.
Just take your head right off.
Yeah.
He was such a sharpshooter. In fact, when he was in federal custody at the courthouse in downtown Denver, they had a little room made up from there. They didn't want to risk doing the shuttle with the van to the jail every night after the proceedings. They had a room built for him and in the courthouse, just steps away from the courtroom. The Army begrudgingly, get this, awarded him not one but 2 medals of commendation for his excellent service in the U.S. Army on General Schwarzkopf's security detail.
Wow.
So, and you're going to tell me he's a disgruntled GI blowing up an AFO?
Right.
A bomb in front of him? No. That whole story went right down the toilet, like I said, 4 hours after the bombing. Then when we saw those records, then we finally realized who he was working for, and that was something that Jones could not bring out in the trial, and I'm going to tell you why. You remember the name Merrick Garland came up about 2 years ago? He was a nominee for the U.S. Supreme Court. Yeah. Merrick Garland. He's on the appeals court, not the Supreme Court appeal, but it's an appeals court in Washington D.C. Mm-hmm. They oversee all of the other districts, these U.S. Court districts in the country. Merrick Garland was the assistant U.S. prosecutor at the time, but in charge of leading the investigation on this case. He methodically, conscientiously, and with malice, chose to cover up this case with a team of his people. And I have no problem saying that because I saw proof. If Judge Garland has an issue with that, he's welcome to call me and we can talk about this.
Right.
There's no way in hell he's going to do that because we got him painted in the corner on this. So it was him pleading for 3.5 months to have Judge Maish, who's the presiding judge on the McVeigh trial, seal the records. He did not want the broader conspiracy or the broader number of people coming out. It would have compromised the security of a lot of undercover agents in the CIA and the FBI. They did not, under any circumstance, want that coming out. What was in the documents that Stephen Jones showed us? Everything that proved that what I just told you. Unbelievable.
So that's crazy. So, I mean, they call it sheep dipping, right? When they pull you out of the Army and take you into these clandestine operations, and this is what happened with Timothy McVeigh. And then he was He was not supposed to go live. They were supposed to blow up a statue in Oklahoma City at 9 o'clock the night before, 12 hours earlier. But it was McVeigh's handler. And this is Terry Nichols even came out, the co-conspirator, who, by the way, should not be in prison. He was set up. And that's another. I know we only got so much time. If you want to go a little longer, we can. But, sure. Go on this thing and stuff that we couldn't include in the film because we didn't want to hit people with the fire hose on this thing. You got to give it to them in cupfuls, so to speak, and not to patronize them, but you have to set a foundation of, look, not only did this happen, but this is why.
And, the next movie will come out and will develop more on the stuff that we couldn't touch upon in the first one.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, McVeigh was working for the CIA. He was a professional drug smuggler, and he was an assassin, and he got paid very well. He was doing this for 2.5 years before the bombing. You know who his handler was? Number 2 at the FBI. This is his personal handler. This is the guy that's walking him through and giving him the directions.
Wow.
In fact, he changed script. McVeigh knew that the building, well, not the building, but they were supposed to blow up this other target the night before. It was Larry Potts, Potts, that told him, no, we're going off script. We want a body count.
Wow.
McVeigh was furious. He says, I'm an assassin. I'm a drug smuggler. I don't kill innocent people or children. That's not what I do. And it's like, wow, as a film crew, we have no legal standing. We're not out to get anybody in trouble.
Yeah.
We just wanted to be objective on this. There's no political stripe, as you can see in that film. And for us to, how do you go to bed at night when we found this out? It took us 1.5 years to wrap our head around it.
That is crazy. I didn't realize that you had such smoking guns in terms of McVeigh. I knew there was speculation out there, but that's insane that you really could find out primary documentation that shows all of this about his history.
Well, that's why, in fact, and the irony is that in the Nichols state trial, the federal trial only was, I believe, for the 8 federal employees that were killed in the bombing, and that's another ominous sign. It's like, why weren't they in the building?
Mm-hmm.
Well, they had a heads up. I'm not the ones that were killed, but their colleagues, and most of the kids, except for the 19 that were killed in the nursery. Anyway, it was during the Nichols trial, and I was there for 5 days, the first 5 days out of the 2 months that it was almost 3 months in southeastern Oklahoma, in McAllister, Pittsburgh County Courthouse, and Larry Potts was on the list of witnesses to be called to testify. Say, hey, look, not only were you a handler for McVeigh, but this is what's going on. The federal government would not allow him to show up. And Stephen Taylor, the judge presiding over that, was furious. He says, you have no right to tell the prosecution or the defense who they can and cannot call. This is not a federal trial. He was fuming.
Wow.
And I don't know how they wiggled out of that one.
Yeah.
There was also another one that was another handler for Nichols, who we know worked for the CIA since the Vietnam War. They refused to have him come. So you talk about, there again, the friction. It's like, wait a minute, hold on. If you're going to follow the rule of law, don't meddle into a state trial. You have no jurisdiction on the state trial.
Right.
But they did it anyway.
Yeah, the feds seem to be able to get away with that. I mean, who has the power to go after them? So they get to be manipulative on that level, and the rest of us just have to sit around and take it, really.
So you can see why there's that undertow here in Oklahoma City to this day. Mm-hmm. In fact, I want to tell you, this morning I was just half a block from the crime scene. They have the memorial there now and the chairs. Now, make it perfectly clear, make no mistake, that's not the gravesite. The victims aren't buried there. It's just simply a memorial where they have the names and the chairs and so forth. You get on the website, Oklahoma City National Memorial, Google that, and you'll see the chairs there. I was a half a block away having breakfast, light breakfast in the same restaurant, walk-in, short-order restaurant, in the base of the Regency Towers, where a lot of the children's parents lived and some of the victims that lived. And 2 steps from the door where I was standing inside, it's exactly the spot where McVeigh came in that morning before the bombing, about 15 to 20 minutes before all hell broke loose, comes in and buys 2 cans of Coke and a pack of cigarettes. Marlboro Golds. McVeigh doesn't smoke. He never smoked. Why in the hell would he be buying cigarettes? Well, it was for the guy in the truck with him. And for years, that was the enigma. There's a big question mark on this guy's face in the paper. We never knew who he was. All we had was sketches. Now we know who he is. And that's going to be revealed on the anniversary. And wow. It's from a loved one of his that said, yeah, he smoked Marlboro Golds all the time. So, I mean, little tidbits. I'm just standing there. I'm thinking, this is surreal. 23 years later, and these people still insist on lying about this. But we know who he is, and it's going to come out. So,
right.
Anyway, I don't want to go off on a tangent here, but it never dies.
Well, and since we only have a limited amount of time, I did just kind of want to get into the motivations. Why are the feds doing this? I mean, the idea is to bust, to break up militia movements or blame, white nationalists.
It basically, and what we found out, McVeigh was working for a joint task force with the FBI and the ATF. He was the backdoor to the CIA for them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I mean, it is what it is. That's what he did for them. He had no idea. It was they were supposed to stage this thing because at the end of May of that year, a lot of people, at the end of the fiscal year, which would have been June 30 of 1995, the ATF was going to cease to exist. They screwed up so bad in Waco.
Oh, wow.
That both the House and the Senate side of Congress were fed up with them. They wanted to defund, literally pull the plug, shut the lights off, close the door, and walk down the hallway, and never to talk to the ATF again. That's what was going to happen at the end of June of that year.
Huh.
Well, ATF wasn't going to have any part of that. So once again, they tried to stage another event, make it look like, walk right in on the back horse and the shining armor and save the day. And they screwed up royally on this thing. It wasn't supposed to go live. We found this out from local law enforcement, from the county, from the State Highway Patrol that were asked by the ATF to help them with this, to stage it. And a lot of them said, not only no, but hell no. We're not getting anywhere near this. And how dare you ask me, you're going to put the risk our families and friends' lives? Are you kidding me? It was just completely, they were furious. And then that's who was venting. During those 326 interviews, I'd say about half of them just unloaded on me. They weren't mad at me, but they were just finally being able to vent at their frustration to being asked to do this. So, there's nowhere near the story that came out of this. And these people were just absolutely amazing with us. And, it was a life-changing experience for all of us.
Yeah.
It really was.
Well, and then isn't it also true that all the documentations for the Whitewater investigation just happened to be in the building? So Clinton had maybe some skin in the game. Do you think there was some truth to that?
He had a lot of skin in the game. Now, unfortunately we were not able to come up with those documents. We did find out through sources in the fire department and search and rescue that were in there, not only recovering the bodies, but also trying to help out the local and federal authorities to recover some of the records. That the records were, some of the records, what they thought were of those pertaining to that case were in there. As a film crew, we were not able to see those and definitively, say, hey, this is, A to B, B to C, and so forth. Mm-hmm. That's why we weren't able to include it in the film. But we did find out through some trusted sources, back channels, And by the way, not only was the ATF going to be on the block at the end of June, on May 10 of that, actually May 20 of that year, there was a congressional hearing that was going to call the Clintons in front to testify on the money laundering operations, all drug smuggling.
Wow.
That's, like I said, another conversation for another time. Their political career would have gone down the toilet by July 1 of that year. And then, of course, there was a big drug smuggling case. The evidence was in the DEA safe room on the 7th floor. And that was another conversation I had with a female DEA agent.
Right.
She cried her eyes out for half an hour just telling me what happened. And she came within an inch of losing her life. The federal indictments on that drug smuggling case were dropped because all the evidence was destroyed.
Wow.
Yeah. Those people, there were 32 people indicted. Every single one of them walked scot-free, and some of them still live in Oklahoma City to this day.
That's crazy. I mean, so many convenient coincidences for these people.
Well, I'm going to tell you what it is the concentric circles. All of these crossed. They had a common interest in making sure that this thing went off. So what I'm saying is it wasn't supposed to go live, but when the honor among thieves, when word gets around that something like this is going to be staged, you weigh the factors. If, in fact, you're on the other side of the fence of morality, as they say, the other line of morality, what is going to benefit you in the long run? To have that building come down, regardless of the cost of human life, and I'm not justifying that whatsoever. That's just sick beyond all imagination. But when you get these individuals that do not value human life, and they have billions of dollars at stake, whether it be a political career or drug smuggling, you're darn right they're going to go with their motive, what's going to benefit them in the long run. And that we believe as a film crew, and all of our researchers, some of them intimately involved and lost loved ones, and they said, yeah, this makes a lot of sense. And that trumped, by many respects, the fact that the FBI wanted to stage this to the existence of their agency in the first place. Breakdown of communication, ATF, FBI on the ground level, boots on the ground, and CIA were not sharing intel on this. And that's another reason that the whole thing just went completely upside down.
Yeah,
So,
well, that's crazy, and I also understand just one other point. There was a law that was passed shortly after Oklahoma. They'd been trying to pass. I mean, sort of similar actually to the Patriot Act. Again, like we talked about, these same
mhm.
motives over and over again. The same modus operandi that appears. They wanted to pass this stricter surveillance to come down on these, patriot groups or whatever it was, and they couldn't get it passed in Congress. And then, of course, a week or two after Oklahoma City, then this got passed,
Well,
and this surveillance state is starting to get built back in the 90s, even before 9/11.
it's funny you mentioned it. It was, I believe, the 1995. It was an omnibus anti-terrorism act.
Right. Yeah.
That's just roughly. I don't know the exact name. General Parton told me he read over that, and he had a source. His congressman out of Virginia supplied him with a draft copy of what they were going to vote on, and he said the military had that in place back in 1968, and he was familiar with that because he had to abide by the rules of engagement under Geneva Convention on what he could and couldn't do, designing ordinance to minimize civilian casualty and collateral damage, and all of that wrapped up into, all right, if you're going to go after a particular country or party or terrorists, this is what you can and can't do. And he said this thing just overreached it. There are already steps in place many times over to take care of that, what was already in there. And this darn thing just went many, many levels beyond what we needed. It was overkill, and excuse the pun, but it was unnecessary. And then that's what paved the way for the Patriot Act in 2001 after 9/11.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
Well, I'm just, same old again. You're seeing these patterns just continue to repeat. They pull something like this and they use it to their advantage over and over again.
Exactly. Now, let me tell you, I don't take any thrill, or I don't get any enjoyment out of doing the updates here, and as far as what we find out, new information coming out. But we have such a vested interest in this, and there was a lot of us in the crew that we formed strong bonds with the deceased family and some of the survivors. And any updates that we have that are credible, we're very, very thorough about this. We don't go on conjecture or rumor or hearsay. But what's going to come out, and I'm going to give you a heads up on this, on April 19, 1995, is based on solid documentation that is not only from the U.S. authorities that helped us, but from Canadian authorities. They simply don't want to cover this up anymore. 23 years on, that's it. We reached the end of the line here. We're not going to lie for anybody anymore.
Yeah, good.
And that's all I can say right now. But this book is solid, and I've been working with this individual since last July, and enough is enough. She wanted to release the book in March. I says, can you do this? Should we coincide with the anniversary? And I think it's going to have more impact, and it's going to be more relevant to the anniversary. And we do have a lot of the people that we talked to in the interviews that said, yes, we think it's appropriate to do this. So
great. So there's a book coming out next month. That's correct. That's gonna. What do you have a name for it? It's being published.
Well, it is already, the publishers. I already had seen the draft copy and then the revised copy. Publisher out of Canada is doing it.
Okay.
And then it's going to be redistributed here in the U.S. and then of course worldwide on the web. 32 different publishing and distribution platforms are going to pick it up.
Great.
So
yeah. We'll be looking forward to that then.
Sure.
All right, Chris, I just wanted to ask one more question about the Oklahoma City bombing before we move on to the other films. Because we've seen over and over again, as I do this kind of research, that the local news usually does a great job of covering a story, at least initially, and then by the time it gets to the national news coverage, then every single cable news network is following this same narrative. And in the case of Oklahoma City, it was Channel 4. You have this Channel 4 news crew that's actually doing a really good job of figuring out what's going on. They continue to pursue the story, and then after a year, they get bought out by the New York Times organization, and you find that there's these national groups are assimilating, these local people so that their truths can't come out and only this national narrative can happen. Can you describe how that happened in Oklahoma City?
Sure. Melissa Klinzing was the news director at Channel 4, NBC affiliate. And for almost a year and a half, just shy of a year and a half, she was very, very good about trying to be as objective as she could, and as well as her crew, including the lead reporter on the case, Jana Davis, who came up from Austin, Texas, graduated from UT, and was hired worked her way up the chain of command, so to speak, and got into Channel 4. Anyway, the famous quote from Melissa Klinsing for this full year and a half after the bombing was, "There's not one person in Oklahoma City that believes Tim McVeigh blew up the AP Murrah Federal Building by himself." And that's pretty telling and pretty bold for a news director to say. Mm-hmm. This is on the record in the newspapers. And Jana Davis was doing her best to follow up on the leads for John Doe number 2. As a film crew, what we found out, and this is, again, textbook CIA, don't have your listeners poo-poo this. We saw the information. There are actually 2 teams that pull this caper off. One that actually did the dirty work, and another one is a decoy. There were 2 Tim McVeighs and 2 of his accomplices.
Wow.
2 sets. Okay, 2 sets, because they were cited by very credible witnesses at least 15 to 20 minutes drives apart when this thing went down. You can't have.
Wow.
Obviously, you have to have 2 different teams. Okay. Mm-hmm. So, having said that, anyway, the New York Times came in. Yes, in fact, they did buy out, which is typical acquisition, selling. It's just like an asset on the board for them. Mm-hmm. Jana Davis told me she wasn't fired. A lot of people thought she was. She simply chose not to renew her contract when it came up for renewal. Yeah. She had the option of staying on, but she said she didn't want to be a part of that, because they chose to cover up this case, as well as a completely different approach on news gathering, and it wasn't in the best interest of the people of Oklahoma City. Mm-hmm. Melissa Klinsing, on the other hand, her contract was not renewed. She wasn't given the option of staying on. Ended up moving to Denver and then to Philadelphia, and last I heard she was doing a great job at a news station in Florida. So I'm not sure if she's retired, but of course we're talking 23 years ago that this happened. So. But to this day, I have the utmost respect for Melissa Klinsing and what she did and tried to do for not only the news station, but for the people of Oklahoma City.
Yeah.
That is rare. And the New York Times didn't want any part of that at all.
I find it interesting. I call it censorship by passive aggression, is the way it happens in the United States. They don't just have a book burning and say you're not allowed to do it anymore, but they'll make you uncomfortable enough in your position, that you just end up leaving your job because you're like, I'm not going to deal with this anymore. And I see that happen so often with people that are trying to tell the truth in mainstream situations. And then, they just, the pressure becomes so much that it's not worth it anymore to keep fighting. So, it's a great thing about having the internet now is that we can just do it here, do it our own way and get it out on the internet and not have to deal with that.
Well, that's why we, like I said, every single interview, we don't take these for granted. What you're doing is awesome. Yeah, it really is. And don't feel that this is any less of an effort than anybody else. I was a radio show host for the better part of 3 years. I co-hosted a show, Radio Free Oklahoma, based here in Oklahoma City, and so I empathize with what you go through.
Yeah.
This is not fun. You're not making big bucks on this,
right?
But there's a greater goal. There's a bigger vision, and I'm not being altruistic here, but I know where you're coming from, and I sincerely appreciate what you're doing.
Yeah. Thanks. I mean, the people who've listened to the show, they'll know about it, but I had a similar experience at our local NPR station where I used to do local radio here. And finally I was like, I just have more freedom on the internet to be able to talk about what I want to talk about. Because if I got too far away from the NPR narrative, people around the station just started to look at me funny.
Sure.
It is the nature of it, and it is great that we have these more the ability even to get on the internet and be independent and go where the evidence shows us to go instead of having to deal with these narratives. And that, talking about that, actually, let's segue into the second film and the third film. It was nice to see, as I had heard about this film obviously from 2011, and I knew that you guys were doing great work, but then to see that after this movie, after the Oklahoma City movie, then you kind of took a step back and really, I could just watch that thought process like, well, how can they get away with this? If Oklahoma City is the specific instance, then how can they get away with this on the larger level? And so then the next film, which I found incredibly informative, State of Mind and the Psychology of Control, really getting into how, on the bigger level, how do they do this? How do they accomplish? At this point in my life and doing these shows, I'm starting to really witness as a brainwashing what happens when people watch the mainstream media and they come out with a vision of reality that's really couldn't be farther from the truth. And yet when I have conversations with so many people, even in my community, trying to be like, here's the real evidence. They just can't even see it. Hey, I heard it in the Washington Post. It must be true. They just can't believe that, like, you're being lied to in the Washington Post, and you're being lied to across the board. So many people have this feeling that, well, we have a free press in this country. So if the Washington Post and the New York Times and CNN is all saying the same thing, then it must be true, or else somebody. But what you start to tap into in the second film, and then again in the third film, which really gets into the people and the organizations that are actually doing this, is how they work together, how they're colluding to manufacture these narratives. So, sure,
yeah. From the second one, State of Mind, Psychology, Control. In fact, all three films, we tried to interview the experts, and especially in the second and third film with the peer-reviewed authors. It was just, we were just very humbled that they agreed to come on, and they saw the quality of work that we did on the first film, and we were like, wow, okay. Anyway, but what we tried to do, and it's not the end-all be-all, just as all three of our films aren't, but try to give the viewer a primer, try to give them a foundation of, okay, if you're going to try to understand what's happening literally from the day you are born till the day you die, whether it be in education, media, nutrition, the way the certain elements of the government are telling you what to do and what not to do, at least you can step back and say, hey, you know what? I have some control over this. I do have some autonomy. I'm not just an Autobot that is out there to obey rules and commands. And I'm not saying doing anything illegal, don't get me wrong, but you're born with a beautiful spirit and a beautiful mind. Develop on that, and help each other to do that versus following commands of people that really, and honestly, at the end of the day, they do not have your best interest in mind.
Right.
No matter how you look at it. You're their pawn on the chessboard. You are not a pawn. You are an autonomous being, and you have a great mind and a great heart. Use it for the good and for the betterment of yourself and others. That in a bigger picture for society, hopefully you'll have at least look at these films and say, okay, I've got some tools to work with here, and I can decide for myself what I can and can't do.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. I think it's difficult for a lot of people to grasp. And we're almost starting to have this conversation. I did kind of want to get into this with you because we're getting into this situation like with the Parkland shooting or, with these people that a lot of people are starting to really doubt the mainstream narrative. I mean, I think that probably we're seeing an all-time low in terms of people trusting the national media due to a large part because of the work of what you're doing and what other people are doing to get the truth out there. And to the point where we're not even sure if these guys are crisis actors, or like people are actually having these debates.
I live in Florida now, and when I heard that come down, both the Orlando Pulse nightclub issue was in June of last year, and I found out through a news source, actually two in Orlando, that the press conferences they had post event with the medical staff, that most of the people in those press conferences, not only one, were not medically trained. They weren't even doctors. They were literally brought in there as place markers, given a lab coat and made to look official. But
wow,
it was horrible. In fact, one of my sources said he had to walk out of it. He says, "My God, I mean, what is this? This is something out of Central Casting." It was horrible. Yeah, and two of his sources were from the local county sheriff's department. And they were running security. They were actually post security for that event, that press conference. And they found out that most of these people, not even remotely qualified, medically or what, to even be there,
right,
or to speak on an expert level. All right, so you fast forward to Parkland, the high school in Parkland, Florida. And yes, there were crisis actors there. I mean, without a doubt. I mean, it is what it is. You cannot deny the facts that are on the street. Having that 19-year-old student coming in from Redondo Hills, California, when he graduated from the high school in 2015, to show up in 2018 in Parkland, Florida, posing as a senior. Are you kidding me? And then he's a spokesperson for CNN.
Well, that was a red flag for me, too, that CNN was suddenly all over this, like instantly. They're right there. They're ready to have, to produce all of these town hall meetings and these other things. And the students that it just seems so amazing at promoting their perspective, like, well, wow, who's coaching them,
Well, I found out boots on the ground what happened with Wolf Blitzer. CNN had a bureau here for 90 days in Oklahoma City, by the way.
Uh-huh.
Not a lot of people knew that. I mean, that was a shocking, obviously, one of the worst case of terrorism in the history of the country at the time. And then he's bumping his gums again for the Parkland high school shooting, saying, "Oh yeah, these students are under uproar." No, they're not. They're being told what to do. They can't think for themselves.
Yeah.
They're 15, 16, 17 years old. And you're going to parrot this narrative about telling us what the student? No, you're telling the students what to do. And it was so obvious. I don't even watch CNN anymore. And I'm not, like I said, I'm apolitical. But Wolf Blitzer, he was a fake back when the Oklahoma City case, and he's still a phony. He hasn't changed. He's just gotten older. That's the only thing that's changed with him. So, anyway.
Well, it is amazing to watch the mainstream narratives. And again, I mean, did you see? You probably did see, but the new study, I saw it out of the Free Thought Project, but it's been kind of all over the internet. Is the meme, and it because of your other movie Shadow Ring, which talks about how the Council on Foreign Relations is behind a lot of this. That it actually showed that every single manager or top editor at every single mainstream news outlet is a member of the CFR across the board. And that's when you can look and say, oh, well, here's people talk about a conspiracy theory. Like, well, it's not a theory when you can see them all getting together in the room at the Council on Foreign Relations in New York and talking about what their narrative is going to be,
That's right. Yeah. And they take
their
take their thought process from the Tavistock Institute in London. And that's what we touch upon in I believe the third film. So, but again, the state of mind was, okay, Oklahoma City was a microcosm, one case. State of mind is like the methodology, give you the tools to think independently and see what's going on, at least in a broader picture. And Shadow Ring was taking that to more on the world history level. Okay, who's taking care of the resources and the food and the media and so forth, and how are they controlling this? Why do wars pop up? Not by chance,
right?
But by design.
Well, this gets into what we're seeing now with all this propaganda about Russia that's kind of blowing me away. I don't think I've seen anything like this on this level
it's over the top.
Since weapons of mass destruction, right? I mean, it's like 10 years or 13 years ago when they were drumming us all up for Iraq, then this is what we were getting. I was blown away back then at are you telling me that nobody at any of these mainstream... In fact, that's when I really started to wake up, was that period, because it was so obvious that, first of all, if anyone asked any questions about 9/11, they were getting shut down. But then to watch every single, from NPR to Fox News across the board promoting this weapons of mass destruction narrative and being like, well, wait a minute, isn't there somebody out there that disagrees with this, that disagrees with going to war with Iraq?
Sure.
Come on.
Sure. Well, the white papers that Tony Blair and George Bush put together were completely phony. Yeah. They were based on just flat out whole cloth lies, and I'm surprised that Tony Blair, as well as George Bush, have not been indicted on articles of treason, both to the British population and the United States. It's horrible what they did. They brought us into a conflict to overthrow a sovereign country based on complete lies.
Yeah.
Just whole cloth lies.
Right.
And I am not political I'm not Republican, I'm not Democrat. I'm a filmmaker that steps back, trying to the best of my ability. I'm not perfect. I make mistakes. I'll be the first to admit that. But when you see this, it is so blatant and it is so in your face. And it's like, no, I am not going to be lied to. I'm an adult. I'm an intelligent adult. Quit insulting my intelligence,
Yeah.
And that was the motive for us. And I'm going to tell you one thing. The reason we did Oklahoma City, and this is by a grandmother of one of the babies that was killed, she gave me a very small check to start the funding for our film. And she looked at me, and her gnarled, arthritic hands took my hands in her hands. She says, I want you to find out who the SOB was that killed my granddaughter. And please, for the love of God, let's not remember the deaths of these people in a lie. And that's what we did. We chose to go for the truth wherever it led us.
Yeah.
To the best of our ability. And that's what everybody, your listeners should try to do that, whatever extent they can.
Right.
When they look at, these shootings, this is ludicrous. These shootings are staged. They are done for political purposes. And it's just, we stop believing the lies. That's what we would try to do in our films and hopefully give the tools to the people to do that.
Yeah. I mean, it is pretty amazing. People, not only do they have to trust their own rational faculties too, and like you're talking about, like, go where the truth takes you, because I mean, you get into it all really in these two films, but I mean, it starts with public education. The public education system is teaching you the very lies as if they were the truth that you talk about in the film, the false flags that led to World War I and World War II and Vietnam and, you know, the Gulf War and Iraq. And I mean, and that you go into public school and they're teaching you this history like it's the truth when it was yellow journalism back then. And so it really is incumbent on everyone to be able to take that step back, do your own research, and not just trust your own, you know, your own critical faculties, but to you know, get out of this brainwashing. The trusting of the authority, I think, is what allows them to pull the wool over our eyes, you know?
A classic example of what you're talking about as far as the schools teaching false narrative. Back in 2010, with the 15-year anniversary of the bombing was coming up, and there was a big fever pitch both in the House and the Senate. You know, Ron Paul was riding the wave, and we thought, you know, he was going to be nominated for Republican Party and so forth. A lot of things going on, but there was a measure in fact, I met both the author of the bill in the House and the Senate, the U.S. or the state rep and the state senator. And you know what the bill was? To make the official narrative of the Oklahoma City bombing, official textbook curriculum for the Oklahoma State Board of Education. And I thought, wow.
Right.
Wow, that is the ultimate in propaganda. And we, in fact, our film crew and about 6 of our supporters, we stuffed about 15 people in their small offices, both on the Senate side and on the House side. And they looked at us like deer in the headlights, like, what are you talking about? I says, please, under any circumstance, withdraw your support of the authoring of this bill. They co-authored it. And sure enough, 2 weeks later, the governor signed it. And I thought, oh my God, it's horrible. It's like, and I'm not being trite here, and we can wrap this up. If you want to believe that the Battle of Gettysburg, and this is a very accurate analogy, it was a minor skirmish between a Union Army supply caravan and a scouting regiment from the Confederate Army. That's exactly what we're asking to believe what the official narrative in the Oklahoma City case is. Everybody knows what the Battle of Gettysburg was. It was horrible,
right.
A huge loss of life.
Yeah.
But it's the same thing. We're asked to believe just a steady stream of whopping lies on this. And I may sound passionate on it, but no, this isn't about personal passion. This is about doing the right thing and about telling the people of Oklahoma City and the world what really happened here, who was responsible. And there is no statute of limitations on murder. There are individuals that still can be sued on a civil level. The statute of limitations on some of the criminal penalties have gone, but if you collude to plan, commit, or cover up a capital murder offense, you can still be held accountable. There is no statute of limitations on that. So that's what we tried to do with the film. At least tell the people, hey, look, this is what we found out. Take it the next step. Use your intelligence and decide for yourself.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate the work that you're doing, and it's helping to wake people up, and it's helping to get the real information out there. We're living in a very outrageous age where the American people, I mean, I've been kind of waking up to the fact that we are the most propagandized people probably in the history of the world, with the highest quality of propaganda, and to the point where most Americans don't even know that that's what's happening to them. They think it's a free press, and they're getting, you know, the truth all the time, and we have this incredibly open society, and it's just like, that's not what I'm seeing, you know, and so helping to you know, wake people up from just that inundation of the state propaganda that's going on, to the point now where they're trying to pin people like us as being Russian propaganda, you know?
No, yeah, that's complete. You talk about yellow journalism.
Yeah.
Anyway, I do have to go.
Okay, great,
thank
Chris.
you. I appreciate the opportunity, and let's do it again sometime soon.
Yeah. Do you want to give people your website or where they can get more information? Sure.
It's freemindfilms with an S, freemindfilms.com. And if you get on there, just if it's on your phone, 3 horizontal lines on the top left-hand corner, scroll down to films. You can order them on our Vimeo channel. We'd love to have the support on that. If you want to contact me, just simply do it at contact@freemindfilms.com. I will get the email, and I'll try to respond within 24 hours. Thank you for your interest and support of our work, and I'm just very flattered to have the opportunity to be here with you.
Yeah, and thanks for coming on The Shift, Chris. I really appreciate your work. You're definitely helping to make the shift and change people's minds and wake people up, so I appreciate that. And I just want to take a second to remind everyone that if you like what you're hearing on the show, please check out and think about becoming a patron at patreon.com/The Shift. Check us out on Facebook at The Shift with Doug McKenty. We're on Twitter at DMcKenty, and my website is www.theshiftnow.com. All right. Thanks again, Chris. Really appreciate all your work. And if you want, we'll get in touch again after this book comes out, and we'll do it again.
Thank you. Have a great evening. Be good.
You too. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.